Hey, friends. Can a brain retraining program really transform the lives of people struck with chronic illnesses? Today, we're going to talk about groundbreaking research that might just change the way we approach and think about recovery from these conditions forever. Hi, everyone. I'm Raelan. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we dive into recovery journeys from chronic conditions like CFS and Long Covid. I'm thrilled today, right now, to welcome back the amazing Ashok Gupta to the channel. Ashok's journey began over 25 years ago when ME knocked him down while studying at Cambridge University. And through his own research, he managed to heal himself completely and has since dedicated his life to helping others to do the same through the Gupta program. One of the pioneering and most respected CFS recovery programs out there. He's here today to share his latest research study, which shows the effectiveness of brain retraining across 14 different chronic conditions. Oh my goodness, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. So let's dive in and welcome Ashok. Ashok, so amazing to have you back on the channel. Thank you for doing this.
I'm really excited to be here and thank you for the invitation.
I learned so much the last time you were on the channel. I still quote you to this day. People have heard me talk about you in many different videos. You are a wealth of information on this topic. So really excited to dive into this today. And I don't know if everyone knows your story. So before we go into, kind of the nitty gritty of everything, I think it would be helpful if you wouldn't mind sharing just a kind of a quick overview of what your own history with these health conditions is.
Yes, well, like many of us in this space, we've come through our own journey and our own suffering. So my journey started in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, where I was studying as an undergrad at Cambridge University, and I had a virus, and the virus seemed very normal, and it seemed to dissipate, but my symptoms got worse and worse. There's a common story, obviously, we hear with patients. And in my worst moments, I had to crawl to the bathroom. I couldn't read the words on a page. I felt extreme exhaustion, which I describe as your worst day of flu times 10, where you literally have zero energy to do anything. And I went from doctor to doctor, and they would say to me, "We don't know what you have. We don't have a name for it. There's nothing we can do, and you might have it for the rest of your life. Goodbye." And remember, this is the mid-90s when a lot of these conditions weren't even recognized or taken seriously, and certainly the idea of brain retraining or anything like that was unheard of, and neuroplasticity. So I was on my own, and I met hundreds of others who were suffering as well. And in my worst moments, I made a contract with the universe, and I said, if I can just get myself well, even if it's just 30% better, 50% better, hopefully fully well, I will dedicate the rest of my life to helping others with this condition. Because there are millions around the world suffering, and no one's really looking after them. And so then I managed to research some brain neurology at that time, which was, I won't say it's in its infancy, but certainly was an emerging science. And I managed to figure out a system and a process of what I thought was going on in my brain. In an ad hoc way, in the mid-90s, I retrained my brain, got myself back to full health, and then set up a clinic to help others. And I published my medical hypothesis in 1999, 2002 in Medical Hypotheses. And then since then, I worked one-on-one with patients, and I published the first neuroplasticity program, the brain retraining program, in 2007. And I've been working on medical studies and working with patients ever since, and here we are now.
That is absolutely incredible. It just blows my mind that you were able to figure this out and get past this when you were hit with this in the 90s. I mean, many people feel lost today, and we have a lot of information now, but 20, 30 years ago, there really was nothing. So really, really incredible. And now you've helped so many people. And one of the things that really stands out about the work that you do is the research that you do, because there's skepticism around a lot of different recovery approaches, understandably. And also, how do we know what to trust? How do we know what's working? What isn't? And I know you've recently done some incredible research. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, as you say, in order for brain retraining and neuroplasticity to become more of a mainstream idea, we need to focus on the science and really have good, solid scientific studies to support what we're hearing anecdotally. Because a patient can hear some great stories, but until we have science behind it, it's not going to be taken so seriously as the mainstream. And my aim is that 5-10 years' time, when you first go to your doctor with one of these conditions, you actually are prescribed brain retraining right up front because there's enough clinical evidence behind it. And that is my vision. And hopefully people like yourselves, all of our collective vision is that we can bring healing to millions around the world. And so a recent piece of research we just had published was actually not a randomized controlled trial, but was a clinical audit, an independent clinical audit of our patients. An independent organization looked at delivering a survey to our patients, about 400 to 500 patients, and looking at how they improved after 3 months of using the Gupta program. And out of 16 conditions that our patients reported, 14 of those conditions were significant in terms of the percentage improvement in their health after 3 months. So, for instance, with conditions like in chronic fatigue syndrome, there was 70% improvement after 3 months. Long COVID, 84% improvement after 3 months. Mold illness, 67%. Multiple chemical sensitivities, 85%. So these are just some examples of the 14 different conditions that we studied. And I think what was really interesting about this study is that it's the first time that we've taken multiple different conditions and actually studied them and looked at what the evidence base is behind it. Because normally you take one condition and see if it improves that condition. But to have it improve 14 different chronic conditions was really, I suppose, supportive of the hypothesis that I have, which is that there are many branches of many trees, many different branches of illness. So you have the sensitivity illnesses like mold illness and chemical sensitivities and mast cell activation. Then you have the neuroimmune conditions such as fibromyalgia and long COVID and any CFS. And then you have the pain conditions. And then you have other inflammatory conditions. But could it be that they are simply branches of a tree, but the same trunk and the same root is at the root cause of a lot of these illnesses, which is essentially what we believe is conditioning in the brain, specifically the amygdala and the insular part of the brain. And this study seemed to support that idea that if we can significantly improve the health of people with 14 different types of conditions, then that would be the first time that that kind of idea has been demonstrated.
This is incredible. I'm still stuck on those rates of people who are recovering and the significant progress that was seen, and the mention of, you said, what, 500 people or so, hundreds of people this was looking at just in this one study. The amount of people that you're reaching and helping, this work is clearly working. I mean, you mentioned, I think you said 2007 was when this started. That was the year my mom passed away. Like, it was just on the who had CFS her whole life, and eventually just gave up because there were just no answers. And to hear that this is out there and this is happening and you are helping so many people just gives me goosebumps. It's an amazing thing because this is such a devastating condition for so many people, or these branches of conditions. And I'm sure people watching, if they're not familiar with your program, are wondering, okay, so what are you doing? What is helping people to have this much improvement in their conditions? What does your program focus on?
Yes, well, we've spent the last, now you say it, 30 years. It's actually been 30 years since I started this type of work. So we've spent every year refining the technique so it works for most people most of the time. And essentially the core of it is the 3 R's of the program, as we like to call it. The first R is relaxing the nervous system. So if we believe that the brain is the cause, the ultimate cause of these conditions, not the mind, as you actually know, I'm sure in your conversations with many people, we have to be very clear. We're not saying it's in the mind, but we're saying it's in the unconscious brain. If it's in the unconscious brain, the brain itself isn't very flexible if we're stressed. So the first is that nervous system regulation. So regulating the nervous system, relaxing the nervous system is the first step of brain retraining. And we do a lot of work on that, lots of different tools and techniques, whether it's somatic work, relaxation, meditation, breathing, vagus nerve, all the different array of techniques. Then the second R is retraining the brain, and that is a unique 7-step process that we've developed to retrain the brain. And also we do something called somatic retraining, which we've done since 2007, and also something called the accelerator technique. So we have 3 main brain retraining types of approaches, and people often find their favorite that works for them because each person is obviously very unique. So we have a range of different techniques. And the final R is re-engaging with joy. And what that means is that, sure, people can retrain and get health quite quickly, but they need to maintain that health for the rest of their lives. That's the most important. And if we aren't aware of our previous reactions to stress, our parts, and I know that you're a fan of parts, our parts that may be stressful, that are exhibiting those stress reactions to our environment, If we don't monitor that, then of course the stress cycles can start, the brain thinks we're in danger, and we can go back into illness. And so we want people to get well, but to stay well as well. So we spend a lot of time helping people understand their stress reactions and maintaining that more centeredness, calm mind for the rest of their lives. So that's the third R of the program. So that's essentially how it works. And I think we like to feel like we use a broad range of techniques that people can then dive into, depending on which ones are most effective for them. And so that often makes our program almost, when people first come, they think, wow, there's so many techniques, versus there might be other programs out there that just have one thing that they do. But we do that deliberately because we want people to experiment and find the thing that works for them personally.
Okay, so I'm hearing this from you and from so many people, whether it's just people, everyday people who have had to figure out their own recovery, or it's doctors or researchers, people who are working with patients, that a general version of this approach is what works for people. It's time after time after time for me, interview after interview after interview. And this is a really powerful approach to recovery. Yet I'm still seeing and hearing a lot of people saying, oh, that doesn't apply to me. This isn't going to work for me. So in your experience, I know this is a challenging question to answer, but, is this for everybody, or is this only a segment of the population that this is going to work for? How many branches on that tree does this, cover?
Of course, it's very difficult to know, to be sure. But my gut feel is that the vast majority of people with these conditions, ultimately, it comes down to a brain issue, a conditioning event in the brain. And of course, following on from that conditioning event in the brain, there will be downstream effects. So we have dysbiosis in the gut, then we have gut issues, which then can cause secondary issues. And of course, then it's good to go to your doctor or functional practitioner and get those secondary issues sorted out. But that doesn't mean that the core of it didn't start and initiate in the brain. And when we did a clinical audit many years ago, we found that 92% of people with chronic fatigue syndrome improved on our program. So I would estimate that at least 80 to 90% of people, when it comes to these chronic illnesses, they fit this particular hypothesis. And of course, there may be some people who don't, but as yet, most, as I said, vast majority of people I meet, they do fit this criteria.
It means a lot coming from you. I'm just trying to do the math. How many people do you think you've worked with over the years and helped?
I think we've helped over 10,000 people in terms of people who have improved, people who've gone out there. And of course, what tends to happen is they get well and then they want to tell other people, but they go into support groups and say, hey, I got better from brain retraining or whatever method. And of course, the other people in that support group say, oh, well, maybe you didn't have the illness then. It's not taken seriously. And that's why these approaches haven't become mainstream yet, because it's not taken seriously until we have scientific studies, and then the medical profession will actually take notice. Because a lot of these illnesses are what I call software illnesses. Mainstream medicine is brilliant at treating hardware illnesses, where the hardware of your body goes wrong. So let's take the example of a car. If the engine goes wrong, you fix the engine. If the tire goes wrong, you fix the tire. And that's how medicine thinks about the body. But in the modern cars, what tends to go wrong is the electrical system of the car. And so brain retraining is the idea that the issue is not in the physical hardware of your body. It is in the software, the programming, what the brain tells the body to do. And so that type of medicine doesn't involve opening up your head and fixing a few wires in your brain. It's only through brain retraining. Until we get some very advanced techniques, I think it's going to be very difficult to reverse these types of conditions, which is why I exhibited at the International Association of Chronic Fatigue Syndrome conference in New York last year. And it was a brilliant conference. It's been going for, 20, 30 years. And one of the leaders there stood up and said, it's great that we meet every year and do this great work. But do you know, in the last 25 to 30 years, we haven't come up with a single biomedical agent that can consistently improve symptoms. And we're going down the same pathway with long COVID as well. So, yourself, you're doing great work. Lots of people in this area, we're just trying to say brain retraining, neuroplasticity, the somatic work everyone's doing. This is the real solution to these conditions.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that because it breaks my heart to think about all because we have now millions and millions and millions of people around the world who are facing these conditions more and more every day. And they go onto Reddit, they go into some of these Facebook groups, they go online, and they're told by a very loud segment of our population that recovery isn't possible and that all of this is just woo, just some sort of made up nonsense when it's clearly not and backed by studies and science and research and all of that. So I just hate to think that people have this barrier to recovery when it has the potential to help so many people in your experience. I mean, because one, already there's a barrier because it's a new way of thinking. Most of us weren't brought up thinking about healing and about symptoms and about pain and about our bodies this way. So already we have to change the way and be open-minded. And then when you're hit with, some very loud people telling you not to listen to any of it, it's disheartening because there's so much potential for people to get well. So yeah, it's incredible that you're doing the studies and the research to help legitimize this and get the word out more. I'm curious because you've done other studies as well around your work. So how does your this most recent study compare to what you've done in the past, and what did that show?
So, as you say, we have to come up with good, solid scientific studies, and those are really the gold standard, which are called randomized controlled trials. So that's obviously where we take a group of patients, we give them an equivalent control, so they're also doing something, some activity, and we give them a retraining program. So yes, one of the studies that we published was on fibromyalgia, and that was a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard in medicine for testing out treatments. And we compared our program to a relaxation program. So the patients in both groups had a similar amount of practitioner time. And what that study found was that after just 8 weeks, in the Gupta program, there was a 40% reduction in fibromyalgia scores, but zero effect in the control group. And in the Gupta program group, there was also a halving of anxiety, a halving of depression, a halving of pain, and a 50% increase in functional capacity. And in the control group, very, very small scores. And of course, our program is a 3 to 6 month program. To get that result after just 8 weeks intervention was a great result. And that was published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine, which is a prestigious journal. And so people can certainly look that up. And after we published that study, what we found was that we had a lot more interest from medical practitioners. Maybe not mainstream doctors yet, but certainly functional and integrative doctors and nutritionists, because finally they had some independent clinical evidence that this type of approach works. And then we published a study on long COVID, which once again was an independent study. And that compared the Gupta program to a wellness program. And that wellness program included diet, supplements, sleep, activity level, so a whole comprehensive program. So it was an equivalent structural program. And after 3 months, they found that the Gupta program was 4 times more effective at reducing exhaustion and fatigue compared to the wellness program, and twice as effective at increasing levels of energy in patients. And many of those patients went on to full recoveries. And that's once again also an independent study that's published in a journal, and people can view that study on our website as well. And once again, after that, we had a lot more interest from practitioners because we're building up that base of evidence. So a nutritionist or a functional doctor can say to their patient, hey, here's a program that has scientific backing. Although these aren't large phase 3 trials, they are promising studies, and therefore, they feel more comfortable in recommending it. And that's really our vision. And I hope that other programs out there also do a similar thing, which is we get a lot of scientific studies, we can finally get this to become mainstream.
Yeah, and if you could share the links to those studies, I'll put them in the video description and people can check them out and just keep them for my own list because I'm compiling. Because people, sometimes ask, they're like, where the really skeptical people, where is the research to back these approaches? And it's out there and it's, valid. People need the buy-in. They want to know that it works. So yeah, amazing that you have this. And just anything I can do to help share that is, I think, a really good thing. We're getting the word out. Yeah.
Great. Amazing job for this community. So anything I can share with you, I will, sure.
You've talked about a lot of different conditions and illnesses out there that you and your program work with. So clearly there are some commonalities. So what are the commonalities that you're seeing here?
Yeah, I think a lot of these conditions start based on the biggest question that we as human beings face. Why are we here? I'd love to have a conversation with you about that another time. But why are we here? We're here from a scientific perspective because this brain, this body, has evolved over millions of years to help us survive, handle threats in our environment, procreate, and pass on our genes to the next generation. So we are survival machine. So that's the number one priority of the brain. And so what's happened is that in a lot of these conditions, the key commonality is that because our brain prioritizes survival over wellness, the brain sometimes gets stuck in over-defensive reactions. Yeah. And let me give you an example of this, Raelan. So are you a fan of fairy tales? Yeah, I mean, who isn't, right? So imagine you're queen of your kingdom and your castle. Yeah, it has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
I like
So
it.
imagine you're queen of your kingdom. So imagine you have an army and a navy in your kingdom. And the army is the nervous system, and the navy is your immune system. And now imagine that there is a drought in the kingdom. So the kingdom is weaker. The army and navy are weaker because there isn't as much food around. And normally they can fight off invaders that come over the hill. But this time it's a little trickier. So now we have an invader, a new army that threatens the kingdom. And that army could be mold. It could be a virus. It could be bacteria. It could be some kind of physical injury or pain. So that invader comes over the hill. And now your army and navy fight it off. But of course, they're weaker than they are normally. So it takes them a lot longer to fight off this incoming invader. And it takes them longer and longer to the point at which they become traumatized by the experience of war. And they think they fought off the invader, but they're not completely sure. And they think the invader might be hiding in the forest. So they come to your meeting with Queen Raelan and they say, Queen Raelan, we are the generals of the army and navy. We think that the invader is still here. So we continue to need the resources of the kingdom. All the wheat, the clean drinking water, the food should all be channeled to the army and navy to help defend against the invader. And you think, well, that makes logical sense. Maybe the invader's still around and we don't want the kingdom to fall because that is literally death of the organism. So we must defend at all costs. So all the resources now go to the army and navy. And they start firing off their weapons of war, their inflammatory processes, their cytokines, the tension in the body, overstimulation of the nervous system and immune system. And of course, the more they do that, the weaker and weaker the kingdom becomes, because some of those arrows start falling back into the kingdom. So we get inflammation, autoimmune effects. And now we get spies that proliferate in the kingdom. So opportunistic infections, opportunistic virus, bacteria, mycotoxins, they all start flourishing in the body. And we get dysbiosis in the gut. So you can see that because the army and navy keep firing off their weapons of war, hyper-defending, the whole system is in imbalance. And therefore, whether it's pain that impacts the body, whether it's mold, whether it's a chemical, whether it's a virus, the unique response is the army and navy firing off different types of weapons, but ultimately they're in an over-defensive reaction, which is why so many people with chronic fatigue and mold might have pain and vice versa, right? And which is the primary condition? It's because they're all along a scale. And what brain retraining is, the next time those army generals and navy generals come to their weekly meeting with Queen Raelan, you say, my dear generals, you have done a wonderful job, but the war is over. You can stand down. And that is, in a nutshell, a very superficial nutshell, how brain retraining essentially works. So we're training our brain that the war is over and we can come back to homeostasis and balance. And the reason neuroplasticity is so important is because the first time those generals hear it, they won't believe you. And the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time. But it is through repetition and commitment, and of course, self-compassion, that eventually the retraining is able to happen and people can get back to health. And the reason we emphasize repetition, and something new that we've introduced, which has been a game changer, has been something called daily Gupta size, which is we know that patients are at home, they're isolated, they often don't have the opportunity to retrain because of, they don't have the inclination or they're tired. So we have daily Zoom calls with our coaches where retrainers can come on and we hold their hand through the nervous system regulation every day, and then also the brain retraining, 2 separate Zoom calls. And it has been a game changer. So people who've taken months and months to heal, within weeks now, they're finding the effects because they love the fact that they don't even need to learn the program. They can just come onto the Zoom call and we take care of them. We have 200 people a day coming on those calls. So the powerful effect of healing in community, seeing your friends, connecting and supporting each other has been, amazing. So that's something that really emphasizes the repetition. But yes, in a nutshell, the commonality between all these diseases is an over-defensive nervous system and immune system, the Army and Navy hyper-defending.
That's a really great way to think about it and to understand what's happening. I'm thinking too, as you're talking, because there's a lot of discussion these days about with people who are facing these conditions, that there's an element of, repressed emotions, resistance to negative emotions, trauma that is not dealt with. So in your experience, how or does this factor into all of this?
Yeah, so trauma is something that's very important to recognize. And we don't use our program as a trauma program, but we certainly are trauma informed about the importance of having awareness of it. And many people ask me, Ashok, do I need to deal with my trauma before I can heal from my physical illness? And I say, no, that's not necessary. Well, it's not necessary all of the time, because there was times when you had that trauma as a background, but you didn't have this illness. The illness is a layer that rests above anything that's happened to us in our past. And many of our clients, we heal them first from the illness, and then they can go on to working with some of our trauma specialists that we have within our organization to help them with trauma afterwards. So we often see that patients who get these types of conditions, these neuroimmune conditions, have a background in trauma or have experienced trauma with either small t or a big T. And why might that be? Well, it's because we believe that the brain does not differentiate between physical threats, emotional threats, immune threats, biological threats. So what may happen is if someone has a background of trauma, then it means that their amygdalas, which is part of the brain that is essentially our emotional response to our environment, becomes trigger happy not only to emotional situations, but also biological situations. Because as we said, the brain doesn't differentiate. And the amygdala part of the brain used to be only associated with anxiety and PTSD. But now they're finding that the amygdala is associated with pain and is also associated with immune responses. The same with a brain structure called the insula, which doesn't actually sit in the limbic part of the brain. It sits between the limbic and the cortex. And we believe that that is also where the conditioning lies. And that is impacted by trauma. So when we have a background of trauma, our nervous system is sensitive, which makes us more prone to learning new sensitivities, whether they be emotional sensitivities or physiological sensitivities. And that for me was the aha moment when I was learning about this in the 90s, that of course, the same biological systems that are responsible for emotional reactions are also responsible for immune and biological reactions. And hence, that's why we see that crossover in these conditions.
So these days, and it's a really good problem to have, we have so many programs out there, quite a few that are helping people with recovery from these sorts of conditions. And it can be a bit overwhelming for people to try and figure out, what is a good fit for them? What is the difference? So what is the difference between the programs? What does your program look like? And what can people expect when they come to work with you?
So I think what is unique, or what we like to say is the unique features of our program, is first of all, it's a very compassionate approach. So I think sometimes with brain retraining, it can be almost like a boot camp approach where we do repetitive processes and it's done in a very kind of left brain manner. And we like to think that actually it's only with self-love and compassion that actually the brain will be retrained in the longer term. So I think that's something unique that we do. And secondly, I think having the scientific studies behind it is incredibly important. So as far as I know, we are the only program that have independent randomized controlled trials proving effectiveness. I think thirdly, what's important to us is the daily Gupta size, that repetition. So being able to just come online every day, join hundreds of people and have that connection in community and healing in community, I think is really unique and really important. And finally, the ability to have it on an app, because you don't want to keep logging into obviously an online system. So the ability to just quickly get into your app, listen to a meditation, listen to a somatic exercise when you're feeling unwell, means that everything is easy to access. So I think that's really important. So I think there's lots of things that other programs do in a really great, unique way, and the things that we do in a unique way as well. And so I think it's my suggestion to people is you try lots of different programs out and you just see what you resonate the most with.
Yes, and I think for sure, one of the incredible things that your program is going to offer is that you have been doing this for such a long time, and you're going to learn over all of those years from all of the thousands of people that you've worked with how to keep refining and what works for people and what's happening with the people where it's not working so well. How do we address that? So just that wealth of knowledge and experience is so invaluable. Yeah, just incredible. And of course, everything people watching that you need to know about Ashok Gupta and the Gupta program will be linked in the video description. So please expand that. Take a look. He's doing amazing work. Some really great stuff there. Thank you so much, Ashok. As always, so much information. You are just a wealth of knowledge and insight. I really appreciate you and all that you do and your compassion for the people going through this and just your commitment with your life to helping people get past these conditions. And just thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much, Raelan. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And I think you mentioned in terms of how people can find us, they'll be in the show notes there. We'll link to the research as well, because we've talked a lot about the research today. But yeah, we'd love for people to just come and take our free trial. There's lots of free resources, videos, audios, and even free retraining, so people can come on some of the daily calls for free, the nervous system regulation, and they can experience that. And yeah, we'd love people to come and join us.
Absolutely amazing. Yeah, that will all be linked for you guys. Really excited for you to check it out. And let me know in the comments. Let us know in the comments. What do you think? What questions do you have? What's your experience been with all of this? And if you're watching and if you have a story to tell, please let me know. There's also a link in the video description to get in touch with me if you want to share your journey. I'd love to hear from you. And a special thank you to our channel member, Manya. I hope I said your name right. Big hugs to you. Thanks for joining the channel. If you're watching and you want to become a channel member, you can just click on that join button and you'll get information about what that is all about. So yeah, thank you again, Ashok. Thank you to those of you watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a ton out of it. And I will link Ashok's first interview on the channel, which is quite some time ago. Also amazing and full of so much valuable information. So if you enjoyed this, this was a great one for you to check out.